to Bad Marriages in the Bible.
Welcome back, everyone.
I'm Kate.
I'm Sean.
And you have found Dandelion Ministries, where we share the grace of Jesus Christ in your place of need.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to do that through creative means like this podcast, which is looking through the Bible. We're walking through the entire Bible, but with the lens of looking at the marriages.
We're just picking out the marriages. The ones that we think are bad, too. So
yeah. If there's like a
basically every marriage
boring
we're looking
one,
at.
yeah, there's not like a boring is not the right word, but I don't think there is one that's just like, oh wow, that was just so without any conflict or turmoil. There isn't
No,
one.
I mean, we did Song of Solomon, but
there was a lot of conflict and turmoil in there.
Yeah.
Lots of it. So
go back and listen to it.
So really, it's a nice alliteration for all marriages, because through the marriages in the Bible, God shows his big redemption. And we love to also use music and art and host retreats and help do creative outreaches in your neighborhood. Neighborhoods like yours, people listening right now, you may have a way that you wanted to reach out to some neighbors, but just didn't know how to do it. And we love dreaming with people and helping them do something creative that suits their passions anyway, and thinks out of the box and a way to love on your neighbors. So those are some of the things we do at Dandelion. You can check out our blog. But we invite you to join us now in Esther chapter 5.
Can I say something about the outreach thing you just said?
Yes.
It was
please
well put. The other thing was, on that note, it's just, it was something that was really helpful to me from one of our mentors. It was just, if it matters to you, then it's going to matter to somebody else. Like if you have a deep passion about something and you are kind of like geeking out, as they say, on something, that's not an accident. God knows who he made in you. And like, but there's going to be somebody else out there that is like, oh, I like that thing too. And it's an open door for evangelism. You know, we often think of evangelism as that I have to go stand on the street corner and shout things at strangers as they walk by.
It's probably the least effective form.
Yeah. Or, you know, something where you've got to be Billy Graham and, you know, a great orator. And, but that's not at all often how it works. It's through relationship and through connecting with people. And so anyway, when we talk about being creative and the way we reach out to people, that's what we mean, is just where do you get a lot of joy and excitement, and what kind of, you know, really gets your juices going and you want to share with people. You know, there's going to be somebody out there that is into that too. And so that's why we use art and music. Kate loves visual art. It's what she does. If she didn't do it, she would be a very sad, depressed person. And,
that's true.
And me too with music. It's my language. And I always want to be creating it. I want to be listening to it. And so that's why we use these gifts that the Lord has given us to connect with others. And so that's when we come alongside others. That's what we're encouraging them to do, is like, well, where are you already engaged with the community around you, and what are the things that you just love to do? And if you didn't do them, you would feel dead somehow, you know? And so that's when you're thinking about connecting with people and sharing faith and all that, the sharing of the faith will come naturally when you make these connections, and when you actually, it will pour out of you. It's one of the promises of the Holy Spirit that Jesus gives us. You know, it's going to bear fruit. And so finding those connection points, which often feels like the hardest thing when you're talking to somebody or trying to connect with somebody from outside of the church. It actually can be one of the easier things when you think of it through the lens of, what do I love to do? And start there.
Absolutely.
So anyway, just my little aside for you, if you're thinking about the fact that you want to talk to people about your faith, or you want to connect with people outside of your circle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Esther, they use a beauty pageant.
There you go. Esther was beautiful. So use your physical beauty if that's what you got.
Try beauty pageant.
It was a terrible segue, but Kate got us back on topic. And please don't do a beauty pageant, but here we go. I mean, you can if you want. I just won't be there.
Some people are into it.
It's true. It's a Little Miss Sunshine. It always makes me think of that too.
It does.
If you haven't seen it, that's your homework. Little Miss Sunshine. Hilarious movie.
Yes. There's some beautiful things in there.
Mm-hmm.
So Esther, we've been looking at God's divine intervention in Esther because he's not mentioned anywhere in the book, but he is everywhere in every page, putting people in just the right positions using their
physical beauty,
their beauty, their interests. She was interested in becoming part of the royal family.
Yeah, she was interested in being queen. Why not? Let's go with that. Isn't that my little aside on evangelism was not perfectly related to what we're talking about, but it definitely,
we can make it work.
We can make it work.
And also, Mordecai and Esther could have gone back to Jerusalem with the exiles who were allowed to return, but they didn't want to. They wanted to stay in Susa. They wanted to stay in Persia. So
yeah, I think
where you like to live is one too.
There you go. I like Susa, so that's where you want it. But the thing that is in there is what Kate said: is we see God's sovereign action throughout this thing, and we don't hear like, and then God said, it's not like other parts of the scriptures. But what it does do is validate your everyday existence. Like it works through. We see him all over this story without having it being, pointed out with his voice breaking in.
Like where you live right now.
Where are you living?
What you do for a living. What interests you, what you do in your time off, who you fell in love with. None of those things are accidents.
Yeah, God is actually in control.
There certainly is a stream of thought that would say that's completely random and there's no meaning behind any of it. But what this book of Esther and what the Bible is saying is that there's somebody who is deeply invested in who you are and knows exactly how he made you with personality and interests and strengths and weaknesses and knows the kinds of sin that you deal with and is for you. And has put you in certain places, not by accident.
Yeah, and it means too, like if maybe you've grown up in the church or you're a Christian and you're kind of wondering, how come I don't have those like mountaintop experiences or whatever, where God is just like, where I hear the voice of God and he's like, go, like Jonah, like go to Nineveh, like. If
you ever heard that, I can tell you what, you're probably going to do just what Jonah said.
Yeah. But the encouragement in here is that you're going to experience life often this way, like we see in Esther, where like circumstances happen and you are there, or that God puts you in a place, or he puts someone in your life, that you didn't expect. I mean, because this is life. I mean, we talk about, we want to often, as we've said so many times, make it all about our choices. And life is all about, what I choose to do. Am I, going this way or that way? But the reality is when you just look at life, so much of it was, despite your choices, you were surprised by it. You had no idea. You weren't looking for your spouse that way. I mean, maybe you were. Maybe it was like Match.com or something. Or maybe it was a beauty pageant like this king. But those would be the exceptions to the rule, I'm pretty sure. The reality is we don't know what's coming. Every day, we have no idea what is going to come. Even when we have really well set schedules and we're good planners. Stuff happens all the time.
I feel like everybody these days, like, I just need to be a better planner.
I need to plan better. If I just plan better, everything would be fine. It's like, it's not true. You would plan and then something would happen and blow up your schedule and then you'd be in crisis. But that's the thing that we see in this book is we see God working through life and we see how it plays out, where it's like, well, Esther, happened to be in this kingdom and was the most beautiful person, and the Lord it's not that he was like, oh, that's a good idea, we'll use Esther. It's like, no, he was like, actually put her there and he's behind it and he's in it and he is working through the earthy, mundane things of life. And that's true for you and your life. And we see God and experience God often working in our lives this way. It's through the relationships with others and being surprised by things that happen. And we're like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought that, I was going to end up here working with this person or doing this thing. And so anyway, it's just an encouragement. I think this book is encouraging for that reason alone. Despite, not to mention all the facts that he saves a whole people group through it too. But
yes,
but it's like,
it
also is just, it's affirming the fact that you in your everyday life are not somehow outside of God's plan. That was something that used to kill me as a kid. Like, I got to find his plan and I got to figure it out. And if I got to go wherever he's moving, that kind of language, like, that's not true. He is with you right now. You are right where you need to be right now. And he's moving right now, especially when it is a dark hour, which is what this is. This story has got the Jews in the darkest of hours.
It's true. And that it always encourages me too, with a crippling sense of, not good, insecurity or like I'm not good enough or I can't, this is too much for me or I can't do this. I'm not good enough. That thought. But if the situation, the position is like right in front of you and like others are like, you should do this and you feel it in your heart too. Yes, I should. Then it gives me courage to walk into that too.
Yeah.
That's something that God has planned ahead of time.
Right. And that's where that's as we left off last week. That's where Esther is. She's sitting there like, I didn't choose this. What? Like, she didn't know she was going to be queen when she was born.
I'm not even talking about anything as grand as like sacrificing my life.
Oh, sure. Of course.
But she is faced with that.
Well, no.
That would be another level.
Yes. But that's my point. Is like, it actually, if it's true there, it's true on the smaller things too.
And there we have Esther, right? There we have Esther. If this is true in the face of genocide, then it is true for a normal Tuesday also. And so that's the point of the Bible and all of the crushingly horrible marriages that they have in there. If this can be true for us, if God is actually coming to save and to forgive sins and to give his son to us, and all of the Old Testament, because we've only been in Old Testament so far. So Jesus isn't anywhere except that he's everywhere. And so they're all pointing ahead to what he would give to us and how he enters into the everyday and into our relationships and into this, covenant of marriage that God has given. I want this special relationship between a man and a woman, and it's going to be filled with rocky bits so that I can enter in and show my forgiveness and show the power of my redemption. And so that you can know what it's like to be loved in your weaknesses and forgiven. And so we have that with Esther. So if it's true in genocide, it's true for an everyday moment also.
Yeah, there's a t-shirt for you.
Yeah. Right. And that's another thing to test, if this breaks down, if your whatever message you're being told breaks down in the face of genocide, then maybe it's not worth spending time on right now.
Right.
So that's
there you go.
Way to go with it.
Well, it's that's a good point, because the zeitgeist of our time is, we're very postmodern, postmodern, whatever it is, where we all have very subjective definitions of truth. And, we use that phrasing all the time. Your truth, my truth, blah, blah, blah. And we don't like absolute truth. And yet we ended last episode with Esther standing there saying, if I perish, I perish. Like, this is actually worth, like you said, this stands up against genocide. This stands in the face of my own life, that there actually is something greater than us, and there actually is truth worth standing for. I cited last time Braveheart and some of those movies that are just so inspirational that we have, all of us have them, that we just love, that we're, some of our more filmy, criticky friends might be like, oh, it's just another human triumph story or whatever. And it's like, well, there's something in there that where someone stands in the face of something. And Braveheart is not that, just to stick with that one. You know, it's not human triumph. Like, he does die. Sorry, spoiler alert for all of you. And but there's the point is that he's actually standing. His life is worth giving to something, and that is what we see Esther saying. Like, she doesn't want to die. Clearly, she's like, hey, Mordecai, like, I don't really want to die. That sucks. I didn't plan this one. I didn't even plan being queen. It wasn't like my little dream when I was a kid.
Right.
I wanted to be a nurse or a big animal vet, whatever. Like, these are the things that we say. And I wanted to be a trucker, for the record. And here I am, not a trucker. But we don't plan these things out. And here she becomes queen. And she's like, I didn't choose to be queen or like go into this thinking I'm going to do this to sacrifice my life for my people. But here she is. And that's what Mordecai says, for such a time as this. And we get confronted with these things in life, maybe not on this scale, as Kate was saying, but we do get confronted where it's like, this is something I want to stand for. And that's worth standing for. That is actually bigger than me. And so anyway, that's just something I really love about that moment too, is that there is truth and there actually is something bigger than us. We're all longing for it, no matter what we say. We are all desperate for something that actually gives our lives purpose. And the thing I love about Scripture and I love about this story is that it's saying there absolutely is. There's something more important. You know, there are worse things than death. And you were talking about that at the end of last episode of just, we have a promise. We have a promise of heaven. We actually have a promise of something there's actually, the wrongs will be made right. And there's things worth standing for and worth sacrificing yourself for. So anyway, so take us into it, Kate. Where are we? She's just said, if I perish, I perish. What does she do next? I mean, she's going to walk into the king's chamber uninvited.
Join us in chapter 5.
Yes.
That is what happens. She does approach the king, and he miraculously does grant her favor and permission to speak, and he points the scepter at her, spares her life, and wants to know what she wishes. And here she's quite shrewd. I would probably be like, bleh, you know.
Haman's a jerk and he's not even going to kill the Jews.
Save the Jews. By the way, I'm Jewish. And, you know, you've got to protect these people that you just had, you know, a drinking party with Haman about killing them all the night before. So that's probably what I would do. But she is quite shrewd in this moment. And she invites him and Haman actually to a banquet. And there she wines and dines him, and he is delighted to go. And that's a request. He's like, oh, why, yes, you know, she's going to throw me this wonderful banquet and I get to look at her and eat food and drink. And my buddy Haman is going to be there too. I mean, it sounds like a great thing.
Yeah, it says, I mean, verse 2 of chapter 5, you know, that she won favor in his sight, you know, like that when she walks into the room.
That's the divine intervention right there.
Intervention. Like God has put her in this place for such a time as this. And he continues to give her favor. And the king's like, this is a great idea. She's going to throw me a little private party with my bed. Like, sweet.
So she's incredibly shrewd about it, you know, and appeals to his desire for pleasure. So she does that. And then at the end of the banquet, she invites him to another banquet.
Yeah, she's buttering him up because she first finds favor and he says, what do you want? Even up to half of my kingdom. Like, is it hyperbolic? I don't know. It's incredibly reckless as a leader. I'll say that. Like, I'll give you half my kingdom. And then
right.
It's like,
what I mean by that is,
probably
a banana
not.
stand.
That's right. It's always money in the banana stand. Sorry. Arrested Development. If you haven't seen that, my gosh, where have you been? Go watch Arrested Development right now. But
and Little Miss Sunshine.
So she's found favor in his sight, and she's very, like you say, she's like plays the long game here. It would be hard for me too. I'm like, let's rip off the Band-Aid here. Let's go in there. I know I might die. Like, she's gotten over that hurdle. But he doesn't know. She's still not said, like, I'm a Jew. You know, he doesn't know that. So she is really warming him up. And at the end of the banquet, he's still kind of like, it's not just because of a banquet, right? I mean, you know, you've got to want something. And she's like, well, how about we will you come to another dinner with me?
That's
So
right.
she's very smart.
She is. And also, the beauty in that story is that it gives an overnight in between. And a lot of drama happens in that overnight, because in that overnight, Haman has gallows built for Mordecai that are incredibly big, incredibly tall, ostentatious, and he's going to make a big show
of what happens to this Jew.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also that night, the king cannot sleep. So that's how chapter 6 opens. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the chronicles that were read before the king, and it was found out how Mordecai had told about the ones who had tried to kill him in chapter, whatever that was, 2. In chapter 2. And so Mordecai had actually spared the king's life, and that was he and Esther.
It saved him, yeah.
He and Esther tag teamed to save the king's life right at the very beginning, and the king had been grateful, but he had forgotten about it. And so, 5 or 6 years later, the king cannot sleep on that night, and they read the history books and they see, oh my gosh, Mordecai, have we ever thanked Mordecai for saving my life? And so that's divine intervention right there. That's God troubling his sleep, making him want to read the history books, bringing to remembrance that Mordecai saved his life. And then to bring full justice about, he asks Haman, what would you do to honor somebody and thank them for saving your life? And Haman, pridefully thinking he's referring to himself, lists all of this stuff to honor somebody in that case, thinking it would be about himself. And the king ends up making Haman do that for Mordecai.
Yeah.
Dress Mordecai in the finest robes, lead Mordecai on
the king's horse.
Yeah.
Give him the king's ring, all that.
And shout about the streets about how great Mordecai is. And
this is
Haman,
how the king's what is it? This is how he favors those. This is how he celebrates those he favors. Forgive me. Yeah. Whew, I got there. But that is, that's a great moment. We were talking about at the beginning of this, when we started covering Esther, was just how, it's a wonderful play. Like, when you see it, how it plays out, that's such a good moment when Mordecai's like, or Haman is like, yeah, that's such a great idea, Lord. You should. King, you should do this and that. It's going to be great. I think it's a great idea how to honor these people. And then he's like, awesome, do that for Mordecai. And it just is, as the crowd, you're sitting there like, yeah, cheering against him because he's such a jerk. You hate Haman so much. And, but it's this poetic justice. And at the same time, though, there's no resolution yet. Like, this is the interesting thing. So Esther has been put into this place of power and influence. She's using it, but she's playing it smart. And then God gives the king a restless night, and he remembers Mordecai. And then Mordecai is held up in this place of position. And the king's not even putting 2 and 2 together. Like, he's not even thinking like, I'm celebrating this guy, even though I've decreed that the whole Jewish nation is going to be destroyed.
He is, as you would say, he's compartmentalized.
Yes. Yeah.
How can you hold 2 opposing, truths here? And he's compartmentalized. And you were saying too, before we started this podcast, how God raises up the humble and he opposes the proud. And that's one of the marks of the way God loves us, is that where we are proud, that's bad for us. That is where we are trying to be God in his stead. And he will humble the proud and exalt the humble. And that's, part of Mary, Jesus's mother's song. It's part of Hannah's song in the Old Testament. And here you see him doing that. And so the Jews watching will see, oh, this is my God at work. This is what he does. He brings the proud down and he raises up the humble. And that's the most loving thing to do for a proud person. And it's the most loving thing to do for, someone who's brought low.
Yes. It's what Jesus tells his disciples too, just very practical, like dinner party etiquette. He's like, when you go to a dinner party, don't sit at the seat of honor, go sit at the lowest seat, and then they'll elevate you, and bring you to a higher seat.
Yes.
And everything like that. It's like that's his way of talking about this very thing. And, it's what God does in his word with us. It's why Jesus was so upset with the Pharisees more than anybody else, the teachers of the law in the New Testament, because they were self-elevated. They were in a delusional state of thinking that they were actually righteous according to the law. And so they were proud in that. And that's total death. It is a lie that if you sit there and think self-righteousness is a lie, if you think you're good in your own strength and your own effort, you're in for a rude awakening. And that's what Jesus, with the law, when God speaks to us through his word of law, it does that work of humbling the areas of pride in us where we think we can stand without God's grace. And it actually puts that to death. It shows us that we're actually desperate for someone to save us. And then that's what he does with his word of the gospel, his word of grace and mercy for you and forgiveness, is he actually lifts you up out of the ashes and gives you new life. This is how God works. And we're seeing that here. Literally, Mordecai has been raised up from the ashes of grieving and mourning over the potential deaths of all of his people, and God lifts him up out of that position.
That's right. And then there's actually a prophecy given by Haman's wife. You pulled that out earlier, that she says to him at the end of chapter 6, then Haman's wife and his wise men around him say to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. So they have heard of the Jewish people and that there is a God behind them, and you don't want to mess with their God.
Right.
And you don't want to mess, if their God is fighting for them, then you will not succeed against it. Right. That's implied in this message. If he's among the Jewish people and this has begun to happen to you, then any of your plots against Mordecai are not going to work, because his God is fighting for him. And in fact, you are going to suffer instead. And so that is kind of a beautiful prophecy right there. I bet Haman's wife became an Old Testament Christian, which would be a Jew at the time, or became a believer in God, let's say, or a God-fearer.
Yeah, and it echoes back to the king's servants earlier when Mordecai refuses to bow to him. It's like, we'll see if his words stand. And we hear Haman's wife and his wise men kind of saying a similar thing, like, oh, his words are gonna stand, it looks like. You've begun to fall before him. And so like that test of God's power versus human power, we're beginning to see how this is playing out, and they're telling us how the story's going to end. It's right after that happens, right after his wife.
Take us into the second banquet.
Yeah, they say that the king's eunuchs, remember all these eunuchs, poor guys. Anyway, these eunuchs come from the king, and they take Haman to the second banquet, where the queen, Esther, has prepared a banquet for Haman and for the king.
In chapter 7.
Kate wants you to know where we are in the book. And so they are drinking wine and eating the feast, and the king then asks Esther. She's already laid the groundwork. She's gotten him ready. I'm going to ask you something. I'm just going to wait. And he's like, what is it? What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what's your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled, right? So she has done a very good job of getting him ready for this. And she says, if I found favor in your sight, then I pray that you would save me and save my people. And he's like, what? He gets so ticked. He's like, because she's like, I'm to be annihilated, and so are my people. And he flies off the handle. He doesn't understand the context at all. And that's when she says, I'm a Jew. And Haman is the one. First he says, who's going to do this to you? And she says, Haman. And he's like, and he loses his top, blows his top. And that's when she reveals who she is and who her people are. And the king gets so ticked, and Haman immediately falls on the floor and is like groveling at her feet, And the king realizes about the gallows that Haman had built. And he's like, you are going to hang on those gallows now,
Mm.
not Mordecai.
Yeah, there's even a little extra drama moment because the king goes out to
That's right.
compose himself. And while he goes out, Haman continues to beg for Esther. And then he comes back into the scene and it looks like Haman is like mauling Esther. And he's like, what? Would you attack my wife too?
Right,
and Haman's like having the worst day of his whole life.
Really, really bad day.
Yeah. He was like, I was just begging for my life. But then he goes and gets hanged on those gallows right there. And justice is served.
Yeah.
And it's humbling for any of us who have been proud or exalted ourselves or wanted to murder somebody else.
Yes. But it is also, we see God's fulfilling his promise, to his people that he will preserve them, he'll protect them, he's their defender. And he has used Esther to be that, and Mordecai, both. They were both put in these specific spots so that they might get to this place. So we see justice for them in response to Haman, but there's still this problem of the decree that has gone out. But the tides are turning. So what happens there?
Exactly. And so Esther asks the king to try to revoke his decree. And he's like, I can't, I'm the king. It can't be revoked.
Put it on my seal. It's like, I can't even do anything about it. It's so stupid. I always get so annoyed with that.
Don't you have the ultimate power?
What do you mean? You said, dummy.
I know, but I can't disagree with myself. It makes me look bad.
The royal seal on it. So that means it's an irrevocable thing.
So they come up with yet another shrewd solution. And he's like, put my full authority, the king's seal, signet ring, use my Pony Express to send out this message that all of the Jews have my authority and blessing to arm themselves and to defend themselves and to fight for themselves. So the average Persian farmer would receive this edict and be like, oh, wait, so the king wants me to kill them and like get my pitchfork and like go kill my Jewish neighbors on this day. But then they can arm themselves. Like clearly he's kind of on their side now. And so, what's my real motivation for doing this?
Tell me my motivation.
What do I get out of this? The king's not going to get mad at me if I don't do that. So the average Persian may have not really done it, but it leaves room for those who truly hated the Jews to still go and attack. Right. And that's what you see in the text, is that those who hated the Jews did attack, and the Jews did defend themselves quite well.
Yeah, it says, in chapter 9, it says the fear of Mordecai had fallen on the people and the fear of the Jews. So like most of the empire, like you said, decides this is a bad idea. Bad idea, genes. We're not going to get involved in that. That's a SNL skit. For those of you who don't know it, look it up on YouTube. You'll laugh. But then they do have some attack them. And it says that 500 in Susa were killed by the Jews because there were people that were like Mordecai. Haman. They were like Haman. They were like, we hate these folks. We want to kill them. And after all, this is like the empire that had conquered the empire that had come and conquered the Jews, So like this, there were those that hated them. And so the Jews defend themselves against them. And in the end, it says that they killed 75,000 people that had it out for the Jews. So like, that's intense.
So this is a real reversal. There was genocide planned against the Jews, and instead what happens?
Yeah, God actually saves his people from their enemies. He actually turns this into a moment where their enemies are destroyed. And those who had it out for them that wanted to kill them all. And so this is God fulfilling his promise. We see it as, again, without him being mentioned, we just see his favor. We see his providential work, putting Esther in place, putting Mordecai in place. And it goes from the Jews having the darkest moment, God's people. It's important to remember it that way. I mean, as we've said before, the Old Testament is a picture of God choosing a people to show himself, and because of his purposes. And so his people, his family, are going from their darkest hour, where they were as low as you could possibly be, to now being actually delivered completely and being in a place of safety for the first time in how many years, right? They are actually free from their enemies because of this moment. So, and so that is, to wrap it all up with a bow, as we said, Esther is this foreshadowing of Christ. And this is what he does for us. I mean, the king asks her what she should do, and she tells him, like, I want all of Haman's family to be destroyed. And she's like saying, like, give the Jews the freedom to do this, to actually like deliver themselves and, or to be delivered from their enemies. And that's what the Lord does for us. He gives his life and destroys our enemy, our greatest enemy, which is our sin and the devil and death. He destroys those things in his own body and his sacrifice for us and delivers us. And so the result is praise and celebration. And that is what happens. The Jews celebrate feasts, and they remember this, and they establish the Feast of Purim, which is what Haman used to roll the dice and to decide what day he was going to kill them on. That day has now become a day of celebration and deliverance for them, just like, as Kate said earlier, the Passover. So that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing God's faithfulness to them, and this is all going to point us to the cross, which was a horrible, horrible day where God himself was killed, but it is now the day we remember of our deliverance. When Good Friday, it is good in the true sense of the word. And then Easter is the day when he rose from the dead and conquered death for us and for you. And so that we are actually delivered from our enemies for good.
And what a wild thing that, in this book and in this bad marriage, God uses Esther to symbolize Christ and to be what theologically we would call a type of Christ, preparing a pattern of what Christ would ultimately fulfill, where an unlikely savior comes and sacrifices, or is willing to sacrifice in order to rescue and to save her people. So
it's great.
Amen.
Praise God. It's good news for us today.
Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate your time. Check out the show notes. You can shoot us an email with any questions or ideas of things that you'd like us to cover. We would appreciate any review, or for you to share this on your favorite podcasting platform. You can pass it around. And we invite you also to support this show. There's a way to give through dandelionministries.org/give. And we can keep sharing the good news through bad marriages, just like ours. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.